Welcome everyone to the next installment of our virtual backpack school training presented by the Miami Group Sierra Club. Sierra Club is committed to safety first culture, and as a result, we suspended our outings events and backpacking school when the pandemic broke. But we truly enjoy sharing our knowledge and experience that hopefully makes it easier for people to get out there and experience the backcountry. We have chosen this virtual platform to keep doing that so that once we're on the other side of this pandemic, more of our friends will be able to safely and confidently enjoy the backpacking. Many people view the outdoors as a place of refuge, particularly during these trying times. So we would be remiss to not mention the ongoing protests against social injustice. Sierra Club is committed to social equity and especially committed to ensuring that the outdoors, including national parks, local parks, wilderness areas, are a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. So let's keep all of those suffering medically, suffering economically, suffering from social injustice in our thoughts, but more importantly in our actions. And please, please, please wear those masks. While the last few people are signing in, I'd like to also remind you that we'll have a PDF copy of this presentation posted on the Sierra Club website. At the end of this presentation, we'll place a link in the chat box to that site where you can find that file. You'll also find a schedule showing future webinars that's been scheduled so far, and a host of other things that hopefully you'll find interesting. Educational meetings, our newsletter, ways that you can take action, and of course, our outings events once those are restarted. All right, let's get started. Last week, Brian led us through a great discussion on clothing. This week, we'll be taking a look at stoves and food for the trail. Your presenters for this webinar are all experienced campers, hikers, and backpackers. Additionally, all of us are instructors for the Miami Group Sierra Club Backpacking School. My name is Barry Randall, otherwise known as Aardvark, and I've been camping and backpacking for the past 50 plus years. Currently the chairperson of the Miami Group Sierra Club Outings Committee, where we plan and lead a variety of local outdoor adventures, including backpacking for all skill levels. With me this evening is Brian Wolf, who's the co-owner of Roads, Rivers, and Trails, and is lucky enough to be part of many people's adventures and enjoys engaging with the awesome outdoor community. Every year he continues to pursue adventures in new places, but his passion all began with the Appalachian Trail through hike. Also with us is Denise Tingle, who's been camping and hiking, backpacking for 45 plus years. She's the hiking committee chair for the Miami Group Sierra Club, along with being an instructor for the backpacking school. She leads cycling rides and backpacking trips. Her passion is backpacking and cycling, and she just loves being outdoors. And last, we have Nancy Ball, who's been backpacking and leading trips since 2005 to destinations both close at home and all over the world. This year, she launched a new business planning and leading outdoor adventure trips. Her company's name is Summit Trek and Travel. We're going to start out this evening by discussing some of the common backpacking cooking solutions, the most common backpacking stoves. The first category is the canister style stove. Typical examples of this would be the MSR Pocket Rocket or the Jet Boil. The next category is liquid fuel, typically white gas stoves. A good example of that would be the MSR Whisper Light. We also have alcohol stoves. These are often homemade, but can also be purchased. Less common options. We won't talk a whole lot about these. There's the Esbit, which is a solid fuel stove, very lightweight, but also even slower than an alcohol stove to boil water. There's little stoves that burn like twigs and wood and duff that you kind of pick up around the campsite. Super lightweight. Obviously, your fuel is what you find, but can be a little unreliable. Obviously, you're counting on dry tinder and things that you can use. And then there's, of course, the campfire, which is a lot of fun, but obviously a little risky in the sense that it depends on fuel availability, the weather, whether or not fires are even permitted where you're going. So personally, I like to use that for more of an optional treat of some kind. If conditions are right, you can pull something out and do something on the campfire as kind of an extra. Okay. So let's talk about canister stoves a little bit more first. These are probably the most popular type of backpacking stove. They're reliable, they're easy to light, they often have a built-in igniter of some kind, so often you don't even need a match. They heat up fast, boil fast. One downside is that the canister fuel suffers under cold weather. The gases start to separate within that canister, and it hurts the performance. Lightest weight option, a little heavier than an alcohol stove system probably, and a little lighter than a liquid fuel or a white gas system. So kind of in the middle there. And three basic different styles that we've got illustrated on the left there. First is the system, which I think Jetboil was probably the first one to come out with this, but since then there's been other manufacturers that have this integrated system that includes both the stove and the pot. Then there's the more traditional stove with a separate pot that's kind of shown at the bottom of the screen there. Typically, you're going to want some kind of windscreen or something in addition to just the pot and the stove. And then there's the one in the middle, which is an inverted canister. And inverted canisters are an attempt to get around the cold weather performance issues of canisters, because it kind of flips the gases. So it performs a little more efficiently in cold weather. Okay. Again, if you have any questions along the way, just throw them in that chat box and we'll get to them in a minute here. So a few charts and graphs here. We're going to geek out a little bit here on some of the technical parts of canister stoves. So what this chart is showing is the efficiency of these different canister stoves. So these are a bunch of different popular canister stove brands. And each of them has three bars here that basically show how much water can be boiled with a 4-ounce fuel canister. And 4 ounces is about 100 grams. So it's about one of those small MSR fuel canisters. It's about 4 ounces. And you can see how much you get out of a canister. It is good to know your stove's efficiency. So it's good to know how much water you can boil or how much cooking you can do with the canister. If you don't, people tend to maybe bring too large a canister, more than they really need, or they tend to bring an extra one, or like many of us, you end up with this collection of partially used canisters at home because you're afraid to take a partially used canister out because you're not sure whether it's going to cover your entire trip. So it's good to know how much fuel it takes to boil what you're going to expect to cook on a given trip. The couple other significant things is, as you can see, wind makes a huge amount of difference in some of these stoves in how much you can get out of them. So if you look at that pocket rocket as an example, calm versus direct wind, and the blue bar is calm and the red is direct wind. Get almost half as much on a windy day. If you do use a windscreen and the white bar is the windscreen, then you can see you can almost get back up to the performance of that stove on a calm day. So wind can make a significant difference, and a windscreen can make a significant difference in your fuel efficiency. The Jetboil over on the far right here is the most efficient, fuel efficient one on here. And I'm assuming other canister systems are probably very comparable. It may be a little heavier than, say, a stove and a pot, like a pocket rocket and a titanium pot or something. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute here, but it kind of depends on the length of the trip as to, from a weight efficiency, which one wins out. But the important takeaways here is, know how much you can get out of your stove and take care of the wind problem, because that can make a big difference. Okay. So one of the downsides, actually, of canisters is it's difficult to tell, obviously, how much fuel is left. It is through through a float test. And a lot of manufacturers now are starting to pre-mark their canisters. In this picture, you can see someone's actually drawn lines on here, but they've started to pre-mark them, so if you float it, you can actually tell if it's full or half full or whatever. Or you can simply weigh the canister at home anyway. Again, using the MSR red canisters that a lot of people are familiar with. The small one weighs a full about 200 grams, empty about 100 grams, and it has about 100 grams of fuel in it. So it's pretty easy to weigh it at home. And if you know the efficiency of your stove and you know you have a half full canister, you can figure out how much water you can boil for the upcoming trip. So that previous chart, we saw that the jet boil did about 10 liters of water with a full canister. So if I had a half canister, I could get about 5 liters of water, and that lets me know whether my upcoming trip I'm going to be able to do that with half a canister. So, okay, so let's move on to liquid fuel stoves. And one of the benefits of a liquid fuel stove, it is a better performance in cold weather. There's also universal versions of these that use multiple different fuel types, and particularly if you're traveling internationally outside the US, but you can almost always find fuel for a liquid gas stove. It's obviously easier to know how much fuel is left. The bottle itself is reusable. A lot of people like that because you're not constantly throwing away canisters or trying to recycle them. For the most part, they're a little better at actually adjusting the flame than most canister stoves. This isn't universal, but in general it's true. So if you're doing a lot of cooking, like simmering or boiling for a long time or something like that, a liquid fuel stove might be a better choice. Overall, it's going to be a little heavier system, though, than either a canister or an alcohol stove. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about alcohol stoves. Super lightweight, probably the lightest of the major stove categories that we're going to talk about. There's a number of fuel alternatives, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second here, but there's denatured alcohol, there's ethanol, it's called heat. It's a fuel additive that you can get in gas stations and places. They're inexpensive. You can actually make your own out of a old tin can. So even purchasing one, they're relatively inexpensive. The biggest downside is it's a low heat output, and it takes significantly longer to boil water. A liter of water on an alcohol stove is probably going to take you at least 7 or 8 minutes versus maybe 3 minutes on a canister stove, and very susceptible to wind. You really do want to have a windscreen if you're going to be using an alcohol stove. Most models I've seen, that some actually have an adjustment of a sort, but most alcohol stoves I'm familiar with and have used, it's either on or off. So most people just use them to boil water. And you want to be careful with all stoves, obviously, because you've got an open flame. Alcohol stoves in particular, you can actually spill the fuel. So if you were to be careful with alcohol stoves. Okay. A little bit about the different types of fuel that could go into an alcohol stove. There's ethanol, which you can get lab ethanol, but most people actually or some kind of high-proof liquor is the fuel of choice. So at high heat output, but relatively expensive. Denatured alcohol is another good option. It's another popular option. The tricky part there is that the denaturing agent that they use for denatured alcohol is not always the same. So sometimes it's going to be toxic and sometimes it's not. You just don't know. It depends on what they use to denature the alcohol. There's methanol. The most popular version of that is yellow heat. Again, heat is a fuel additive you can pick up in almost any gas station. So it's actually pretty handy and easy to find, getting off the trail. It is toxic, but relatively safe if you handle it carefully. There's isopropanol, which is either rubbing alcohol or also red heat. And difference between yellow and red heat is basically the color of the bottle that it comes in. So, but red heat, not recommended. It's really sooty, really messy, very toxic. So not a good choice. Okay. So this chart starts to explain some of the things like why does it take so long for an alcohol stove to boil water versus, say, a canister stove, because this shows the heat output of those different fuels. And as you can see, the alcohol is at the bottom of this list. So either ethanol or methanol, either one is much lower heat output per weight of fuel. So while the stove itself is the lightest weight option, you're going to have to carry more fuel with an alcohol system. So for longer trips, actually a canister may be a more weight efficient system. I've read that a rule of thumb, and all of this is rule of thumb because different types of stoves, but a rule of thumb is if you're going to cook more than 10 meals on a trip, you're probably actually going to be lighter overall with a canister fuel system than with an alcohol system. So for short trips, alcohol, hard to beat as far as if you're just looking for weight. But if it's a little longer trip, maybe not. White gas, although it's relatively high heat output, because the system itself with the bottle and the pump and the connectors and all that is relatively heavy, it usually doesn't win on a pure weight basis. So canisters, also another good thing to know is they're generally a proprietary mix of propane and isobutane. Propane is actually the best fuel, but any of us who have gas grills at home with propane know that the canisters to hold propane tend to be super heavy because the high pressure propane mixtures actually mix propane and isobutane. But if they're only using butane and some of the cheaper, probably canisters have a higher percentage of that, it's going to have a lower heat output. Okay. So let's see where we are. I think at this point we're going to pause and see if we have any questions. Got anything in the chat?
Yeah, Daniel asked the question about let's see, it said, I want to get it exactly right. He said, I have lost it, but he's asking, here it is, what stove do you prefer for Ohio?
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I couldn't hear that.
So Daniel is asking, what stove do you prefer for Ohio?
Yeah, I think for Ohio camping or backpacking, I think a Jetboil, like the Jetboil Flash, is going to be kind of one of the biggest go-tos. There's not a wrong answer, but that's just really, a simple to use stove does, most things you'd want. But what do you guys think?
Well, I'm biased. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barry.
No, you go ahead first.
I was just going to say I'm biased to use the Jetboil for just about everything. So when I use the stove, that's my go-to because it's so easy to use and it's relatively light and it heats water up pretty quickly. So I tend to use that for just about everything. Yeah,
and I was just going to pile on and say, Jetboil is kind of my go-to stove choice as well. And one thing to point out, with a Jetboil or actually any canister stove system, but I think the systems like a Jetboil is particularly true. It's very easy to share a stove. One of the downsides of like an alcohol stove is it boils so slowly that it's really, really awkward to share with 2 or 3 people. It just takes too freaking long to cook, right? If you're alone and you have patience and you're trying to be super ultralight, then I think it may make sense. But we often will share a Jetboil with 2 or 3 different people, which means each of us is just carrying, a piece of that stove system. So it ends up being super lightweight as well.
And I use a pocket rocket when I'm not sharing Barry's stove, I'll say. So, but the pocket rocket is also very, very light and quick. Not as quick as the Jetboil, but it, I just haven't. I've had it for a while. It's not the newest one, but it serves its purpose. So.
So there are a lot of things related to backpacking that I think Barry already said this at least once, but you hike your own hike. There's not everything that we talk about in backpacking. There's not just one right answer. Everyone has their own preference for a variety of reasons. So the best thing we can do is give you some of the pros and cons of each, and then after that, you're just going to try it on your own and see which one you prefer based on your own style.
I also think that's a good segue because as we get into what stove you want will depend on what food you want to eat, which is kind of where we're going next.
That is true. Yeah, because that is actually that's a great point, Brian. Because if you're just going to boil water, you probably have more options. If you're actually going to cook, I think it does pretty much eliminate things like alcohol stoves, in my opinion. Okay, so we're ready to go?
I think so.
All right, we got another poll.
I was say we were going to just start off with a poll here, and I guys, Barry or Nancy, I don't actually see the results, so let me know when those are up and how people are responding. But let's launch poll 2, please,
okay.
Denise.
Denise has launched the poll, so it's out there and ready for people to start weighing in. And the question
you can go ahead and start voting. I haven't seen anyone start yet.
Yeah, which of the
there they go. We got 2 out of 10 right now, so I'll let you know when it gets up to close to 100% there.
And I believe this is one where you could pick multiple, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, just waiting on one more. Okay, I'll go ahead and share the results then.
So Brian, since you probably can't see that on your screen, I'll tell you what it says. So for calorie density, 44% selected that, 89% selected weight and bulk, 89% ease of preparation, 33% how long it keeps, 67% taste, and 22% cost.
All right, you guys care too much about taste. I'm playing. No, it's a big deal. All right, no, good good answers. And the thing is for this is that they're all correct answers. All answers are valid there. But let's kind of dive into some of those things a little bit more. So we'll talk about food. This is a favorite topic for most of us, but and also often it's the only thing you talk about when you're on the trail. Surprisingly, all anybody asks about or comments on is what's for dinner or what you're going to eat when you get off the trail. So it's obviously a big deal for a lot of people, and food can be very personal. We'll remind you, I kind of already said it, but hike your own hike. So your stove setup and your food setup. It's totally okay to be different than anybody else's that you're with. This is all about making more informed decisions. So kind of like the pool said, we'll look at caloric value. After all, that's the point. So calories per weight is your caloric density. And we're going to kind of, in one of the next slides, we're going to get into how many calories you should be having. Ease of preparation. So how much do you enjoy cooking? This is where it really comes into, what stove you pick comes into play as well, as there are stoves, like Barry was saying, that are going to be more used for slow cooking. They're going to be a little bit more controllable. Like you said, an alcohol stove not being one of those. Low bulk, so limited room in a pack or a bare canister, or are you just kind of looking for the most compact food options? Good taste. Except for me, who wants to eat high protein cardboard, right? Reasonably priced. Common grocery items are perfectly viable for most of this stuff. Even gas station trips, we can refill a lot of places. Practicality, of course, will crush or spoil. And so we'll talk about some fresh options there. And low weight being another option. So consider the rest of the group too as you go out. Especially if there's only one person meal planning, it's a dangerous thing to have one person meal plan sometimes, but people can get frustrated, whether it's just long cooking times or definitely not eating enough. Obviously, it could change the moods of the group pretty quickly. But, especially in the morning, if you could all cook separate, but setting a departure time for the morning is a good idea. Because of some people's anticipation is to cook a big breakfast and others like to eat a bar as they leave the camp. You want to be on the same page with the rest of the group. So definitely some considerations as you plan out what your camp meal looks like. So the next chart is going to look into the calories a little bit better. So on a moderately strenuous backpack trip, you'll burn up to 2 or 3 times or up to 2 times your normal amount of calories. So it's no time to diet at all. So you can see even in like the moderate temperatures or so, we're recommending 2,500 to 3,000 calories per day per person. And so that's if we were to go out this weekend, for example. And then how that starts going uphill to a point where you do have to really concentrate on that caloric density as you get into colder weather, because if you don't, it's really hard to add up to those high calorie counts per day. So backpacking, it really just jumpstarts your metabolism a lot. Your heart rate is at a very consistent rate, and so that's why you're going to burn through those calories and find yourselves either grumpy or just tired before you get to camp. As far as the food weight, it's an uncertain measure because it definitely depends on what kind of food you are taking, so it gets a little bit harder there. Fresh food is going to be heavier than freeze-dried, but may have the same calories. Weight is a good rough guide here as we look at pounds per day, but better to use the calories as your guideline. You want to make sure you get the calories right more so than measuring your food by weight. Just because there could be a lot of variables there. And so, questions on any of this, let us know. But let's kind of go into popular meal types for backpacking. So how do you add up these calories? And note at the bottom of that slide too, a good mix of carbs, protein, and fats. And of course, there's different kinds of carbs and different kinds of fats as well. You could definitely go down a rabbit hole on the efficiency of some of those things. But these are the most common types of backpacking meals. Flip to the next slide there. So where's that guy? So let's go into each a little bit more in depth, starting with the prepackaged. So a personal favorite, right? I value the time, and I don't like doing dishes, and don't always trust myself in the backcountry to cook something good. So just make it easy for me, right? A prepackaged meal here, very popular because of that. Generally packed as a 1 or 2 person serving. Sometimes even marketed as a 3-person serving, but you're really going to kind of want to gauge who you're sharing with, and if you really want to split that meal in 2. So maybe ask for advice on that, or test one out before you go on your trip, so you know how much food there is in there. There's a lot of variety with these, actually. So including even for special diets or dietary restrictions. So to get a dairy-free, a gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, any of those things is totally doable with these prepackaged meals now. Typically, you're looking at a lot of these, like the Mountain House, is freeze-dried. That's going to rehydrate the quickest. And in this case, and in most cases, it's going to just take boiling water and adding it to the very package. You'll just open up the package and add the boiling water, and it's going to actually cook inside of its own bag. So that's what I meant with the no dishes. I'm going to cook in that bag and then eat it out of that bag, and then just got to throw that bag away. So carry that out and throw it away that way. So you'll also see dehydrated, pre-packaged as well. That's just going to take a little bit more time to hydrate. It might take 20 minutes as opposed to, say, 10. So just and has a little bit less of a shelf life. So where the Mountain House is going to last for over 30 years, you can put it in your basement. Some of the freeze-dried might be more of a 3 to 5 year kind of span there. But these are very lightweight. They're very high calorie dense, protein dense, all of those things, because they're made for these kinds of activities. Very convenient. And then, of course, some negatives. One, you don't control the ingredients. Almost all of these are very rich in sodium. And one reason why you might not want to eat them on a daily basis if you're not backpacking. And then they could also be relatively expensive. So depending on the meal that you pick, just a rough guideline, you could be $8 to $13 for a lot of these per meal. If you could split it, maybe not so bad, but otherwise it is going to add up to be a little bit more expensive of a dinner there. So while there's freeze-dried or dehydrated kind of prepared for you from a lot of different brands, and we could talk about those later if you'd like, you can also do it yourself. A dehydrator is an inexpensive option for you to have total control on your ingredients list as well, something you can have fun with and experiment at home. So definitely requires more preparation at home. It's not just stopping by a store on your way, but other advantages, just any ingredient you can get at the grocery store and learn to dehydrate. It's going to be a lot less expensive because of that. And you really have limitless options. So if you're kind of sick of the same old meals or don't feel like you're finding the variety that you want, this is going to be a really good option for you. Super inexpensive. One other recommendation I'd add to this is you could get bags where you could still hydrate it in the bag to save on dishes if you'd like. But you might still carry it as pictured in a Ziploc. So you can also reuse those Mountain House bags at least a few times, or at least during the trip. So if you took a mix, you could still use that lined Mountain House packaging to hydrate some of your other meals. So here's an example for you. Use this recipe, but a few things to consider with this. And this comes from, well, I was just going to say it comes from Barry, but it looks like it comes from Backpacker Magazine too.
Backpacker Magazine, yeah. Go-to
really
source.
One, it requires actual cooking. So more time to cook your dinner in this case. So some dehydrated meals aren't just going to be add water and sit. Some of it is going to be actually cooking it in the pot while it's on the burner. And that's kind of what, how we were mentioning what stove are you going to use, because you don't want to just burn the bottom and have a cold top, right? So you need something that's going to disperse heat pretty well. This also means you're going to be cooking longer, so there's going to be more fuel required. Boiling water for 8 minutes, for example, for this recipe, I believe. So almost 3 times as long as a freeze-dried or freezer bag meal. And then you have to worry about disposing of the cooking water and leave no trace standards, and of course cleaning the bowls and things of that nature as well. You can get all the pasta out of it, but you still don't want just like the remnants and food waste to attract any animals to the area. So even when we're just talking about fruits and vegetable skins and stems and things like that, that still needs to be packed out as it's unfamiliar. As far as weight is, not a big deal with this recipe, but in general, packaged and fresh items, tuna, lemon, cheese, for example, will add some weight to your carry set. So it's all about informed decisions. If you're carrying a full fuel canister for a weekend trip, extra fuel required for this recipe is no big deal. But if you're on the John Muir Trail with 10 days between resupplies and you're already carrying a little heavier of a pack, this is where you might opt for a different dinner plan. So, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy to talk about some samples there.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, a couple more DYI samples to share with you. Right here we have a recipe for Moroccan chicken couscous, which sounds really, really good. I think I might have to try this. The freezer bag cooking is basically a do-it-yourself mountain house meal. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. One is just to put all the ingredients in a Ziploc bag, a freezer grade Ziploc bag, because they're a little more durable. And then just add near boiling water to that bag and let it set near boiling, because you don't want to melt the plastic, right? You'll probably want to set that bag down into something, whether it's a bowl or a cup or an insulated pouch of some sort. I just usually put mine in my bowl or my cup, whichever I have. Or the other option, which you see here, is you can put the ingredients in an insulated bowl itself, and then you can pour boiling water in without worrying about melting the bowl to rehydrate it. So a little bit quicker that way. This is one of those options where cleanup is super easy. There's no pot to clean at all because everything is cooked in the plastic bag or in the bowl. And if you use the plastic bag into the bowl, you don't even have a bowl to clean up. Other advantages of this, you can season it to your own taste. Brian mentioned before, I think Brian mentioned it, that the backpacker meals that you buy, Mountain House and what have you, are very often pretty heavy on sodium, a lot more sodium than I personally like. They're over seasoned to me, so I like that I can season these things when I do it myself to suit my own taste. And there's usually no waste with this either. For one thing, you can make the quantity that you fix suitable to the calories that you need. When I'm backpacking, I don't burn as many calories as a lot of other people do when they're backpacking. I think my body goes, I don't know, it says here she's doing something crazy again. Let's slow down the metabolism. We might need that fat later or something. I don't know, but I don't burn calories at the rate that some of these other guys do. So I can't eat as much when I go backpacking as some of the guys do. And this lets me have control over how much I have per serving, and I don't have extra hydrated, wet, heavy food that I have to carry back out as trash. We're going to have a future session that'll be devoted to freezer bag cooking, so we'll go into more detail at a later webinar. We can go on to the next slide. Okay. No cook option, which is one of my very favorites. Most backpackers have at least some meals that are no cook, like maybe their lunch, their snacks are probably going to be no cook most of the time, and maybe their breakfast. And with no cook, it means you've got less time cooking, obviously, if you're not cooking at all, which means you have more time on the trail or more time just to enjoy what you're doing and the people that you're backpacking with. It's really very convenient. You can easily resupply from most grocery stores or even convenience stores. And no cook meals can definitely save weight by eliminating the stove and the fuel, But depending on your food choices, it might not eliminate as much weight as you think, because some items that are carried as typical no-cook items can be heavier because they contain water. For instance, you see the menu here with the apple and the cheese stick and the tuna pouch. The apple and the cheese stick in particular had a good bit of weight to this. So you see this particular meal yields 450 calories, and it's at a cost of 14 ounces. But the Moroccan chicken dish on the previous page, by comparison, yielded 765 calories, and it weighed only 4 ounces. So again, calorie-dense foods are the key here, and there are out there. There are things that are more calorie-dense than apples and cheese sticks, so you can get creative with this. One of my secret weapons here in this category is Fritos. Fritos are very calorie dense, and they also are pretty durable. They actually hold it pretty well in your pack. And in a pinch, you can even use them for fire starters. And that's for real. You should try it. It's kind of fun. We can go on to the next slide. Thanks.
Okay.
So here's a sample cold soak meal. This one is a Spanish rice medley, which also sounds really good. I haven't tried any of these recipes Barry's given us here, but I'm going to be trying them. So eating a cold meal or going with just cold food doesn't have to mean that you're just going to eat a hard granola bar and gorp. Cold soak meals really can be quite good. And again, the ingredients are usually pretty available at most grocery stores, and they're relatively inexpensive. So things like instant rice and ramen noodles and couscous, they all make a good base for cold soak meals. And once again, you get to choose the ingredients that you like, the spices and the seasonings that you like, and the amount of food that you like. No stove required, which means no fuel required either, which means that this method is definitely gonna mean less weight. One thing to notice is this, if you look at the instructions here, for this particular recipe, it says to add water and let it sit for 1.5 hours, for an hour and a half. So they're suggesting that on your last break as you're hiking, you go ahead and put the ingredients together, put the water in the bag, and carry it with you that way so that when you get to camp, it's ready for you to eat. I can tell you from personal experience that ramen noodles and couscous are both, they rehydrate faster than that. So typically within 15 or 20 minutes, a cold soak meal that you prepared using ramen noodles or couscous will be ready a lot quicker than the hour and a half sample that we're giving there. Although they might not taste quite as good as using instant rice. On the next slide, another great do-it-yourself option, which Brian referred to, is dehydrating. I have to tell you, I don't have any personal experience with dehydrating my own food. I don't have a dehydrator, but I do have personal experience of drooling over Barry's shoulder, looking at some of the great meals that he's brought using food that he dehydrated himself. And he has been kind enough to share some of those. Like one of my favorites is the, I guess it's called fruit leather, and the pineapple pieces. The pineapple pieces in particular are really, really good. So dehydrating is a great way to prepare the ingredients for your freezer bag, your cooked meals, or your no-cooked meals, like using, fruit leather or jerky. You can dehydrate fruits and vegetables and meats, any of those things. And the end result is you have something that's lightweight, it has high calorie density, and again, gives you the ability to control all of the ingredients. It becomes a very inexpensive way of having some great food, and again, that you have control over all of the pieces of it. It takes longer to rehydrate dehydrated food than it takes to rehydrate freeze-dried food. But freeze-dried just isn't a do-it-yourself option. Freeze-dried foods can be purchased in bulk, but they tend to be more expensive. So, and again, we're going to cover more on dehydrating in a future session when we'll have more time to devote to that particular topic. And we'll move on to one more slide in this section. Just a reminder about storing your food properly. So improper food storage not only means that you might risk losing your food, but you may also impact your personal safety in bear country or even in other environments. Some of you may have been on our webinar when we talked about the Grand Canyon a couple of weeks ago, and so perhaps you remember the crazy little Grand Canyon rock squirrel. A according to the Grand Canyon National Park website, the rock squirrel has sent more visitors to the ER than any other animal in all the experience of Grand Canyon. And it's because they've become accustomed to people food, and they associate people with food, and they will very aggressively go after your food. So people have gotten bitten, people have had their food ruined by rock squirrels. So even if you're not in bear country, protecting your food is important for yourself. But it's also important to protect the animal, because typically once animals get a taste of people food and realize that people have food, that makes them associate us with food, and then 9 times out of 10, that ends up ending very badly for the animal. So how do you protect your food from the other omnivores out there? Well, we've got 4 methods listed here, and each one has its own pros and cons. A rat sack is basically a wire mesh bag, and it's pretty good at keeping rodents out of your food. So squirrels and mice can't chew through that wire mesh. By itself, it's not sufficient because it's not waterproof, and it also is not bear proof. So you still have to combine it with some other method. An earth sack is a flexible container. So it's basically a bag made out of a super tough material that really is bear proof. So if the earth sack is tied properly, bears' claws and teeth cannot penetrate it. So they can't break it open and get your food out. It still has some downsides though, because number one, if it's not tied properly, then bears can't get into it, and it can be difficult to tie. Also, even if it is tied properly, sometimes small rodents can still work their way inside your bag and spoil your food. And lastly, the earth sack is heavier than most of the other kinds of food bags that you might carry. The next one on the list is the bear hang, and that's just simply hanging your food from a tree so that it is out of the reach of a bear. And if you look at the description at the bottom of that, this slide, first of all, that is a bear hang you see in the picture. And then on the right-hand side at the bottom, it describes what out of reach of bear means. And it's that the bottom of your bag should be at least 15 feet off the ground, and the top of your bag should be at least 4 feet below the branch it's hanging from. And the whole thing should be at least 4 feet out from the trunk. Plus, it should be 200 feet from the trail and from your sleeping area. The big downside to a bear hang, it's a very effective way if it's done properly to keep your food safe. But doing it properly is the key, and it's also pretty difficult. So finding that perfect tree that's got a branch at the right height that sticks out horizontally, that is clear enough that you can get a rope over, number one, that can be tough. Sometimes it's impossible. And then making sure it's the right distance from the trail and from the tent on top of that. And then if you're like me, I have a terrible aim. I probably average 20 throws before I can get that rope to go over the branch that I'm shooting for. And land in such a way that I can actually use it. So sometimes it's taken me as long as 45 minutes to an hour to get a bear hang up. Then the last option on here, the bear canister, is probably the easiest and safest of all of the methods listed here. A bear canister is a hard-sided container that, again, is bear-proof. Bears can't get into it. Rodents can't get into it. It's locked using a mechanism that bears can't open. So it's really a very safe way to keep your food protected. The downside of the bear canister is that it weighs more, it's heavy, and it takes up an awful lot of room in your pack. So these are the different methods, and as far as which one you end up using, it's going to depend a lot on what kind of backpacking you're doing, and it will also depend on where you're backpacking and what the needs are for the situation. And that's it for this section. I think we're ready to move on to another series of questions.
Okay, so we have Bob that said, not sure it's safe to put near boiling water in plastic bag. Could be toxic. So us that we've been using, because I typed in there that the Kroger freezer bags we've used before hold the boiling water.
Yep.
And
So,
I think you're correct, Bob.
Yeah, and I'm not a chemist or an expert on it. If you go out, there's actually some websites that are dedicated to freezer bag cooking. And according to them, it is safe to use, say, a Ziploc bag or something like that. I do know some people who use, there are actually specific microwave bags for heating up food that you can also buy. And I have seen some people use those instead of the plastic ones.
Mm-hmm.
they tend to tear more easily. They're a little more fragile, but they certainly are safe because they're actually designed to be microwaved and heated up. So again, everything I read says it is safe to, add hot water to these bags because they have BPA or whatever that toxic material has been removed. But it's a good point, and it might be worth some research.
I do use that Ziploc brand, Zip and Steam, that you can put in the microwave.
Right.
And I've used those on the backpacking trips because of that.
Yep.
I really like the idea that Brian mentioned earlier too, save your Mountain House bags and reuse them for your own do-it-yourself bags as well.
Sure.
It's a great idea. And then Becky mentions on here that there is a boil-in bag for rice, which might be another option. I don't know if that comes without the rice, if you can get just the bag, but that might be something to look into as well.
Yep. Another option is you could get some pretty light and small silicone, like heat treated silicone or, safe bags too. And so I have some friends that will repackage their food. And then of course that has a better environmental story to it as you just bring it back and wash it and continue to reuse that too. So
I really like that. That's a really good one, Brian. That's a really good idea.
Yep.
So,
Hey.
let's see. I make my heat bag. Oh, Daniel said he makes his heat bag. Daniel, you'll have to tell us how you do that.
Yep.
Yeah. I think when we get to the end here, we're going to be able to unmute people, right,
Yeah.
Barry, in a minute?
Yeah, you want to keep going for the moment and unmute here in a minute?
Yeah, let's do that. We'll go ahead and wrap up, and then we can unmute people and see what other questions and maybe suggestions people have.
Okay, great. So there are a lot of great brands for both stoves and, purchased backpacking food. We've just thrown a few of them up here. But we do encourage you to visit an outfitter like our friends at Roads, Rivers, and Trails. A little shameless advertising there for them, to get their experience and their advice when you're looking at any of these decisions, major decisions like buying a stove. Okay, and then what we'd like to do is quickly get some feedback from you in the form of a poll. And geez, I used an old slide here about shelters. But anyway, we want to know if you learned anything new about food or stoves. So if you could just answer here, it's basically just, whether you got anything new out of today's session.
It really helps us to get this information because it gives us an idea if we are on track with what we're putting together for folks. So we appreciate your feedback on this.
And if you do, while people are filling that out, I mean, if you do have any specific suggestions on, topics maybe we should have covered or we can cover in a future session, throw them in that chat. Just a reminder that we'll have videotape of this webinar posted in a couple of days. The PDF is also out there, and we'll post the link to that website in the chat. And if you go out there, like we said before, a whole host of things that hopefully you'll find interesting as far as educational meetings, our newsletters, ways that you can take action and get involved. Okay.
All right, we finished the poll.
All righty. Keep going here. All right. And happily brought to you by our friends at Roads, Rivers, and Trails, our friends at Summit Trek and Trail, and of course by the Miami group Sierra Club. And if you're enjoying this series and would like to make a small contribution to the Miami group Sierra Club, we've included the link to our donation page. Okay. So at this point, I think if people do have to drop off, we're a couple of minutes over time. Apologize again for the technical issues that drove us a little bit over tonight, but we certainly appreciate your spending some time with us this evening. Hopefully you learned something useful and will join us again. So if you have to drop off, have a good evening. But if you'd like to stick around, I think we're going to allow people to unmute themselves and see if there are any other questions.